In 1971, a Soviet biologist named Irina Sapozhnikova conducted a standard population study of earthworms in a field outside Tambov. She mapped 847 individuals across a 340-meter transect. Then she ran a simple experiment. She applied a mild electrical stimulus to a worm at the northern end of the field. At the southern end of the field, 340 meters away, a worm responded 0.3 seconds later. The nerve conduction velocity of Lumbricus terrestris, the common earthworm, is approximately 0.2 to 0.5 meters per second. To travel 340 meters at maximum biological speed, a signal would require at least 11 minutes. The signal took 0.3 seconds. The mathematics does not work. The biology does not work. Nothing in the established literature on invertebrate neurology accounts for what Sapozhnikova measured on a Tuesday afternoon in a field outside Tambov. She assumed the equipment was broken. She tested the equipment. The equipment was functioning. I found this program through a soil science database I was systematizing for an academic registry of Soviet biological research. The program appeared as a cross-reference flag, a soil biology program classified at a level substantially above agricultural research, with an access tier that required a separate clearance request. The request was granted. The file was waiting. Nothing personal. A classification level inconsistent with the stated category of research, and inconsistent classification levels are what archivists investigate. The program was designated Liniya, lean. Its founding documents, dated March 1972, describe an investigation into anomalous signal propagation phenomena observed in soil ecosystems of the central Russian uplands region, with the stated scientific objective of characterizing the mechanism of interorganism coordination in high-density earthworm populations. The framing is biological, and the justification is legitimate. High-density earthworm populations do exhibit coordination behaviors that are not fully understood, and Sapozhnikova's measurement was a genuine scientific anomaly worthy of systematic study. The funding came from the Academy of Sciences Biology Division. The oversight came from a scientific division whose affiliation the documents describe only by a designation I have not been able to trace to any published organizational chart. The question the founding documents do not address is why Sapozhnikova's 1971 measurement had not been made before. Earthworm research is not a young field. Invertebrate ecologists had been studying Lumbricus terrestris populations for well over a century before the line program. The populations had been mapped. The behaviors had been cataloged. The nerve conduction velocities had been measured. The oversight is not mysterious once you understand what was required to detect the anomaly. A researcher had to measure two worms simultaneously, at distance, in real time, with instruments sensitive enough to detect the response interval. Sapozhnikova had done this because she was studying population dynamics and needed simultaneous multi-point measurement. The standard methodology for earthworm research involves sequential measurements, not simultaneous ones, and at the time intervals used in sequential measurement, the 0.3-second anomaly would be invisible, absorbed into the measurement noise of an experiment that was not designed to detect it. In 1971, there was no way to hide your research from the state. Every anomaly was documented. Every measurement was reviewed. Every discovery was classified. Today, you have a choice. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from prying eyes, whether you're researching sensitive topics or just protecting your privacy? Check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. The network had been there all along. The century of earthworm research had not been designed to find it, so it had not found it. Sapozhnikova had been designed inadvertently by the specific requirements of her population dynamics methodology to be the first person with an instrument in the right configuration at the right time. She had found it because she had been looking for something else. Sapozhnikova was appointed program director. She was 38 years old, a soil biologist with a background in invertebrate ecology, with the specific professional discipline of a researcher who has spent 15 years measuring things that do not cooperate with clean results. She was, by all accounts in the file, an excellent scientist who had encountered one measurement that her science could not explain, and was determined to characterize it completely before drawing any conclusions about what it meant. Her laboratory journals from the program's first year are the backbone of the file. They are the record of a careful scientist discovering, step by step, that the thing she is studying is not the thing she thought she was studying. Her entry from June 14, 1972, 6 months into the program, reads,
I want to document the current state of the investigation with precision because I am at a point where the results have outrun my initial hypothesis and I need to establish the new ground before I continue. Initial hypothesis: the 0.3-second response time I measured in September 1971 was an artifact of the measurement technique, or if not an artifact, it reflected some form of physical contact between adjacent worms that allowed mechanical transmission faster than neural conduction. I have now eliminated both explanations. The worms were not in contact. I have verified this across 14 controlled trials in which intervening individuals were physically separated from the transmission path. The signal still propagated. The response time was still anomalous. I then hypothesized that the signal propagated through the soil matrix rather than through the organisms directly. Vibration, chemical signal, some physical medium in the substrate. I have now tested this in substrate-controlled conditions. The signal propagated through populations transplanted to sterilized substrate with no native chemical environment. It propagated in dry substrate and in saturated substrate. It propagated in substrate heated to a temperature that should have disrupted any chemical signaling mechanism I can identify. What propagates is not vibration, not chemical, not mechanical contact. What propagates is something that requires the living organisms to be present. I have confirmed this by testing signal transmission in substrate containing dead individuals. No propagation. The organisms are required. The mechanism the organisms are using is not any mechanism I have a framework for. I'm going to keep testing until I find what I am missing, or until I accept that I am not missing anything and the mechanism is genuinely outside my training.
The mechanism is genuinely outside my training. 6 months in, with 14 controlled trials eliminating every conventional explanation she could construct, and she is already preparing herself for the possibility that the explanation might not exist within her discipline. She was right to prepare. The mechanism was not within her discipline. The mechanism was not within any discipline represented in the program. The physicist who eventually characterized it did so by ruling out everything in his discipline too, and what remained after both of their eliminations is documented in the final report in language that neither of them would have used at the beginning of their careers. Her journal from October 1973, after 18 months of controlled trials, after the alternative explanations had been exhausted, contains an entry that makes the transition from scientific discipline to something else visible in real time. She wrote in her notes with the same precision she had maintained throughout the investigation.
I want to be precise about what I know and what I am inferring, because the distinction is becoming harder to maintain, and I need to maintain it. What I know, the signal requires living organisms. It does not propagate through dead ones. It does not propagate through sterilized substrate with no organisms present. It propagates faster than any biological conduction mechanism can account for. It propagates across distances that exceed any coordination mechanism I can construct a biological model for. What I'm inferring, and I'm labeling this as inference because I may be wrong, is that this network is not doing what biological networks do. Biological networks exist to solve problems for the organisms that comprise them. They are tools the organisms use. What I'm inferring is that this network is not a tool the worms are using. The worms are a tool the network is using. The propagation speed is wrong for the worms to be the agents. The scale is wrong. The consistency across populations transplanted to different substrates is wrong. Everything about the signal is wrong for the worms to be generating it. The worms are present. The signal requires the worms to be present, but the signal is not the worms. I am writing this down because I have learned, in 18 months of this investigation, that the things I am tempted not to write down are usually the things that turn out to matter.
The things she was tempted not to write down. She wrote them anyway, with the same discipline that Belousov would later apply to his report, documenting the observation and declining to name what it implied. 3 years later, in the final note on the final map, she would ask the question those things led to. The program spent its first 2 years characterizing the signal itself, its speed, its range, its relationship to population density, the conditions under which it propagated, and the conditions under which it did not. The results are in the technical logs. Signal propagation speed of 1,133 meters per second through an intact population, consistent across trials, well above the maximum biological conduction velocity and well below the speed of light. Not electrical. The signal was not affected by electromagnetic shielding. Not acoustic. Shielding for vibration and sound did not inhibit it. Present in living populations. Absent in dead ones. Present when individual worms were isolated from each other within the population, separated by barriers impermeable to chemical and mechanical communication, as long as the population as a whole remained intact and living. The living worms were required. Their individual contact was not. In the program's third year, the field teams expanded their survey area. They had been working in the Tambov region, mapping the populations where Sapozhnikova had made her initial observation. In the third year, they mapped the adjacent region to the north, then the region to the west, then the region to the east. The radio exchange that followed the Western survey is in the program's communication logs. I want to read it to you because it is the moment the program understood what it had found.
Field Team West to Moscow Relay. We have completed the survey of the Western sector. We need to report a finding before we file the formal data. Over. Moscow Relay to Field West. Go ahead. Over. Field West. The network is continuous with the Tambov population. Not similar. The same network. We have confirmed signal propagation continuity across the sector boundary. The population in the Western sector responds to stimulus applied in the Tambov sector with the same timing we have been measuring in the core area. The network does not stop at the sector boundary. Over. Moscow Relay. Confirmed distance. Over. Field West, 47 kilometers from the original observation point. Continuous propagation. Same speed. Same characteristics. Over. Moscow Relay. What is the eastern boundary of the network? Over.
There was a long pause before the field team responded.
Field West. We don't know. Over.
They didn't know. And in that moment, the program understood that what they had found was not a population. It was not a colony. It was not even a network in the way they had been thinking about networks. It was something that extended across 47 kilometers of Soviet soil, responding as a single entity with no visible boundary and no known limit. The question Moscow Relay had asked, "What is the eastern boundary?" would take them another year to answer. And when they found the answer, it would change everything.
Field West. We have not found it. We tested the eastern boundary last week. The network continues east. We have tested north as well. It continues north. We have been trying to find where the network ends, and we have not found it. The furthest points we have tested are approximately 70 kilometers from Tambov in 3 directions. The network is present at all of them. Over. Moscow Relay. Understood. Suspend boundary mapping. Return to core area. Await instructions. Over. Field West. Copy. One note for the record. The signal propagation speed is the same at 70 kilometers as it was at 340 meters. Consistent across the entire tested range. Whatever is using the network, it is using all of it simultaneously. Over.
Whatever is using the network, it is using all of it simultaneously. The field team said it plainly, in the radio language of people who have been mapping something for 3 years and have arrived at a description that their training did not prepare them to give. They did not say, "Whatever the worms are doing." They said, "Whatever is using the network." The worms, in their framing, had become the medium rather than the agent. The network was infrastructure. Something used it. Now, I need to tell you what the physicist found. I thought the LINE program was a discovery in invertebrate collective biology, an unusual mechanism of population-level coordination, perhaps electromagnetic in nature, that standard biological research had not previously characterized. The military classification was political, I assumed, a capability for signal propagation through biological substrate that the defense establishment wanted to investigate for potential applications. Interesting science, unusual classification, explicable by the standard logic of Soviet military interest in any novel signaling mechanism. I was wrong about what the signal was. I was wrong about where it came from. The physicist assigned to the program in its 4th year was Dr. Viktor Belousov, 55 years old, from the Institute of Theoretical Physics in Moscow. His mandate was to characterize the physical properties of the signal, to determine whether it could be explained by any known physical mechanism, including mechanisms outside the scope of biological science. He was chosen because his specialty was anomalous propagation phenomena, edge cases in physics where signals behaved in ways that standard models did not predict. He had spent his career finding the explanations for things that initially appeared inexplicable. He was the program's best chance at a conventional explanation. He spent 14 months testing. His intermediate reports, filed quarterly during his analysis, document the systematic elimination of each hypothesis in succession: electromagnetic at various frequencies, acoustic, thermal, quantum biological effects, standing resonance models. Each report is shorter than the preceding one because each report has fewer remaining hypotheses to test. His final report has no remaining hypotheses. His analysis is the most technically rigorous document in the file and arrives by the same route as Sapozhnikova's systematic elimination of every explanation that fits, at a conclusion that the physics does not have a category for either. His report reads, in its central section, the physicist's final report contained a passage that would become central to understanding what the program had discovered.
I have tested the signal against every physical transmission mechanism I can construct a plausible model for. Electromagnetic propagation at various frequencies, quantum entanglement effects in biological systems, acoustic propagation through soil matrices, thermal effects, standing wave resonance in the soil column, and several models I constructed specifically for this investigation that have no prior published equivalent. I want to document what I have found with the same precision I would bring to a result within my discipline, even though this result is outside it. The signal is not electromagnetic. It is not affected by Faraday cage shielding at any frequency I can test. It is not quantum entanglement. The separation distances and biological substrate are inconsistent with the decoherence timescales of any quantum biological mechanism in the current literature. It is not acoustic or thermal. What I can characterize about the signal is what it is not. What I cannot characterize is what it is. I want to make one observation that is not within my disciplinary framework, but that I cannot omit from this report. The signal's properties are consistent with a transmission mechanism that is not physical in any sense my training includes. I'm a physicist. I have spent 30 years characterizing the physical. This signal does not respond to the physical the way a physical signal does. It responds to the living. The worms are not producing it. Something is moving through them. I do not have a word for what that something is that I'm willing to put in a scientific report. I'm documenting the observation and omitting the word.
Something is moving through them. He documented the observation and omitted the word. A physicist with 30 years of practice, arriving at the edge of his discipline and declining to name what he found there, because the name he would have used was not one he was willing to put in a scientific document. Here's the first contradiction. The established biological data on lumbricus terrestris nerve conduction velocity, in the published literature, the reference texts, the standard measurements accumulated across a century of invertebrate research, places the maximum conduction velocity at 0.5 meters per second. This is a well-characterized figure with robust experimental support. The line programs measured propagation speed through a living population, 1,133 meters per second, across trials, across distances, across the tested range of 70-plus kilometers. Consistent, reproducible, utterly incompatible with the biological data. 2 measurements of signal propagation in earthworm populations, taken by different researchers with different methodologies, producing results that differ by a factor of more than 2,000. The biological measurement and the program's measurement are not within any reasonable margin of error from each other. They are not measuring the same thing. The worm's own nervous systems propagate at biological speed. Something else propagates at 1,133 meters per second through the living population as substrate. The worms are the wire. The signal is not theirs. Here's the second contradiction. The program maintained parallel documentation for its central experiments, a biological analysis and a physical analysis, produced by different researchers with different training, filed in separate reports. For the majority of the program's experiments, the two reports agreed on the empirical observations and differed only in their interpretive frameworks, as one would expect from a biologist and a physicist describing the same data. For the boundary mapping experiments, the trials that establish the network's extent, the two reports are not reconcilable in their conclusions. The biological report, authored by Sapozhnikova's team, describes the findings as evidence of an unexpectedly large, coordinated population, proposing mechanisms of collective behavior that, while unprecedented in scale, remain within the conceptual framework of ecology. The physical report, authored by Belousov, describes the same findings as evidence that the network is not a biological phenomenon, that its properties are inconsistent with any biological coordination mechanism and require a physical explanation that he cannot provide. The same data, two disciplinary frameworks, producing incompatible interpretations of what the data represents. Both reports are internally consistent. The internal consistency of each makes the incompatibility between them worse, not better. Here is the third contradiction: the document that should not exist. The line program's field documentation, the physical maps, the measurement logs, the survey records accumulated across 6 years of boundary mapping, was certified as destroyed by administrative order on March 11, 1978. The certification is signed by the program director and countersigned by the supervising division. Standard destruction protocol for classified field materials. The maps are in the file. Not all of them. The early surveys, the initial characterization maps, the trial-by-trial measurement records are gone. But the final series, the comprehensive network maps produced in the program's last 3 years, the maps that documented what the network actually looked like at regional and then national scale, survived the destruction order. Someone kept them. Someone placed them in the file where I am reading them now, behind the destruction certification, without explanation or annotation. The final map in the series is dated November 1977, 4 months before the destruction order. It shows the documented network extent at the time of the program's closure: approximately 40,000 square kilometers of continuous worm-mediated signal network across the central Russian uplands. The population density mapping is overlaid on a standard topographic base. The areas of highest population density, the program called them amplification nodes, points where the network's signal characteristics were strongest and most consistent, are marked with a specific symbol. The highest density amplification node in the entire documented network is beneath Moscow, beneath the city center. The map's resolution is not sufficient to identify the specific location within the city center with precision. It is sufficient to place the amplification node approximately at the location of the Kremlin. I have been looking at that map for 2 weeks. The amplification nodes are marked with a specific symbol, a filled circle, size indicating density, and the filled circles grow progressively larger as they approach Moscow from the south, from the east, from the west, from the north. Every direction leads to the same point. The soil of the central Russian uplands has been apparently oriented toward that location in ways that the century of earthworm research preceding the line program was not designed to detect. The orientation was there before the research. It was there before the building that now stands at those coordinates. It was there when the ground was open field. The program did not build this network. The program found it. Finding it took a specific combination of instrumentation, methodology, and the particular accident of a researcher doing population dynamics work that required simultaneous multi-point measurement. Finding it took Sapozhnikova, but the thing she found was not created by her finding. It was already there, propagating at 1,133 meters per second through the soil of the country, with its strongest node under the seat of the government that had just discovered it. I keep thinking about what that means for how to interpret the history of the place. Not the modern history, the older history, the choice of location, the accumulation of significance at that particular point in the landscape, across centuries of human occupation, before anyone had the instruments to know that the soil beneath it was doing something the soil elsewhere was not doing as intensely. Whether the location was chosen for reasons people could articulate, or whether there was something in the choosing that the network had arranged without anyone knowing they were being arranged. These are not conclusions. They are the questions that occur when you look at a map long enough. The network predates the program. Sapozhnikova's initial observation was the first time anyone had measured it, but the worms that formed it had been in that soil for far longer than any human program. The network was there before the Soviet Union. It was there before any state that occupied that territory. The amplification node under the center of Moscow was there before Moscow. I have been thinking about what it means that the most powerful signal node in a network of unknown purpose occupies the site of the seat of power of the state that happened to find the network and study it for 6 years before destroying its documentation. Correlation is not causation. I know this. I am an archivist, not a conspiracy theorist. But Sapozhnikova knew it too, and she wrote a note. The note is attached to the back of the final map. Her handwriting, dated November 14th, 1977, 3 days before the destruction order was issued. It is the last thing she wrote before the file went silent.
We have been assuming that the network exists to transmit signals, that something uses it to send information from one location to another. This may be the wrong assumption. I want to write it here before the documentation ends, because if I am right, it is important, and if I am wrong, it does not matter because the documentation is ending anyway. Consider a network of this scale and this sensitivity, continuous across thousands of kilometers with nodes of amplified reception present beneath population centers, present beneath the seat of the government that has just spent 6 years studying it. Consider that the characteristics we have measured, the speed, the consistency, the relationship to living population density, are at least as consistent with a receiving mechanism as with a transmitting one. We have been asking, what sends signals through the network? The question I have been unable to set aside for the last 6 months is, what is the network listening to? What is so important in so many places for so long that the Earth itself has built a structure to receive it?
What is the network listening to? She asked the question in November 1977, and the documentation was destroyed 3 days later, and she is, as far as I can determine, not alive to answer it. I am going to close this file. I am going to note the soil science cross-reference as reviewed and reconciled. I am going to return the maps, carefully, without folding the final one, to the envelope they came in and file them where they belong. And I am going to try very hard not to think about what might be listening. I am not going to think about what is under the building where I am sitting. The soil of every city contains earthworms. The soil of every city has contained earthworms since before the city was there. The network, if it is what Sapozhnikova thought it might be, is beneath every archive as surely as it is beneath every palace. Whatever the network is receiving, it receives it everywhere. That should be comforting. It is not entirely. The line program ran for 6 years and produced a finding that neither biology nor physics could accommodate. The finding was that the soil of the country contains a signal network of unknown purpose, unknown origin, and unknown age that uses living organisms as its medium, that has its strongest node under the seat of power of the state that studied it. And that, if Sapozhnikova's final inference is correct, may not be transmitting anything at all, may be listening. The documentation was ordered destroyed in 1978. The maps survived because someone kept them, someone who believed the record mattered more than the order. An archivist's instinct expressed without an archivist's title in a program where the instinct had no official support. I am going to close the file. The soil outside this building has been here longer than the building. The worms in it have been here longer than the city. Whatever the network is receiving, if it is receiving anything, it was receiving it before there was an archive here to hold the record of its existence. The record is new. The listening, if there is listening, is not.